and I will be really glad to moderate again this track. And we will start by a speaker that we really like the content. It's about like API specification and how to build accessible API specification with traditional engineering teams. And I'm glad to have Griffin on stage. Can we have Griffin? Hello, Griffin. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing really well. Yeah, we liked your talk last time. We really want to have it again to open this track on API specification. So yeah, the stage is yours for 20-minute plus 5-minute questions.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining my talk today. My name is Griffin Solot-Kehl. I am currently a developer advocate at Dolby.io. I believe this is the third or fourth time I've been giving this talk at API Days, so I'm very excited to continue sharing this content and trying to encourage everybody towards just an overall better development experience with the APIs that we are all building. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to talk a little bit about myself. Once again, I work at Dolby.io, where I am actually working on a new environment at a company that's been around for a long time, where Dolby's been around for over 40 years, but Dolby.io is a new endeavor where we're trying to make developer-first APIs. This involves things like media enhancement in analytics, real-time communications, as well as a recent acquisition we made of Millicast for low latency streaming. So we have three separate products that all functionally have different API specifications that I have to help just kind of be an advocate for the external developer and work together to try to make these as usable, as intuitive, and as fun to use as possible. I've been in this space for over 4 years using REST APIs the entire time, and I've kind of been from baby startups from around 20 or less people to large corporations of thousands of people. So I have a big focus on API integrations. So I have spent a lot of time with things like building Slack apps, with things like building things on Twilio, with things like building things with Google Cloud. So I've spent a lot of time on different documentation pages, which kind of have made me think of what works and what doesn't work in terms of actually having a good API. So chances are you need to work on your API spec. Most of us are here. This is just kind of where we are in the given space that we're at right now. And we have a lot of different common issues that tend to kind of plague the average API specification, where you can have things like unclear or out-of-date documentation, where you're having a rapidly evolving product, but your teams don't really want to work on the docs. They don't want to update it. They don't want to keep it up to date. That's just too much work. They just want to keep on developing. And it's always a question, whose job is it? Whose responsibility is it? It can also be hard to update existing Open API spec because oftentimes it is just kind of a messy amount of spaghetti code getting in the way. You don't know where the areas you're trying to edit are. You have too many files talking to each other in different ways. It's not well organized. And you also are just showing a lot of different inconsistencies. So one of my pet peeves is when I see inconsistent parameters across endpoints, where when I'm using an API, I want to expect it to work the same way between different endpoints if I'm using the same parent API spec. So when you're kind of calling things in different directions, that tends to be a very common problem that I see. And there's usually a slow process to actually communicate these changes both internally, so that we're updating the specification, we're updating the documentation, as well as externally, where when you are deprecating something or you're updating something, you want to make sure your users both know that it happened and also know how to migrate so that it's working as easily and as quickly as possible. This is less of an issue with API first development, which is why I'm focusing this with traditional engineering teams, but is also just overall a bunch of good tips that you can learn along the way as somebody who is working in the API workspace. So what can we do about it? The one thing that I like to start off with is keeping a modular spec, because I think that this is a technical conference. I want to keep it in the technical world first, where it's very important to kind of treat your specification the same way that you might treat your actual code, where if you're writing the same block of code over and over and over again in a lot of different code files that you have, that's inefficient. That's something that we already know, is saying, no, you can make that a helper function and call that multiple times instead of having to repeat the same block of code over and over and over again. You can do the same thing in an open API specification, which is where the $ref objects come in, where the $ref objects allow you to point to other areas within your open API specification, whether it is in the same file or in a helper file, so that you can reuse them throughout your code. So on the right is the actual open API documentation showing you how to do it, both in JSON and YAML. But this is going to help you identify patterns in new endpoints. So for example, if you're going to have an input parameter or an output parameter that is going to take the same format the entire time, make sure that the names and the descriptions and just the way that it accepts the content is the same unless there is a specific exception of this. Additionally, we want to make sure that we're documenting what all of them do. So make sure that you're using comments, make sure you're using your internal documentation. Just make sure that it's very clear where everything is if you're looking for different things to kind of modify, and how to change them, so that people are just knowing what to do immediately instead of having somebody thrown in to just kind of the Wild West and not knowing where to go. Make sure to check out the documentation on it, because it is there for a reason. You kind of want to make sure that you're using good documentation for how to build your spec so that you can build your own good documentation of your own spec. Additionally, this is actually a comment that I got from feedback from my last ones, which I have been using, but thought was a good thing to show off. Use a linter. So there are so many different linters out there, which are there to help validate your API descriptions and your API spec to make sure it is valid open API, but also makes it a little bit picky in terms of consistent formatting and consistent naming, so that you are facilitating consistency. It's able to support a lot of different languages, and they are built in a lot of different areas as well. So you can even see on this image over here that I took from Open API Tools, which is a very great resource in terms of just everything Open API related, both for linters, for documentation tools, and all of that. It's going to show you all the languages they were built in, as well as all the different versions they support. So it's another important thing to kind of keep in mind, that you are using tools that are appropriate for the version of your open API spec that you are actually using. You can even integrate these directly into your IDE. There are VS Code extensions that allow you to do the linting. Some popular ones are Spectral from Stoplight. Redocly has one built in. IBM has one if you're an IBM fan. So definitely check them out and make sure that you're taking advantage of these free and open source tools that are available to you to make sure that your spec is doing well. So here's an example of our own API spec actually using these references and actually kind of using this code over and over again. So on the top two images, you can see two different components where we are referencing the media input location. And the way that we are using this is, you can see within input, we have the $ref, and it's saying input helpers.yaml/media input location. So we have this helper file going across two different API specifications, so two different files that we're able to reuse between these different things. So if we look at the bottom left, we can see what the media input location actually is, where we have the description and we have even more references. So we can keep on referring things over and over and over again, so that we don't have to keep on repeating the same code. We can actually use it in the right place. Where, for example, the public location reference is actually going to show us the title, the type, the format, the example, and description that you're going to expect in an actual kind of parameter you're going to be putting inside of your API specification. We're working smarter, not harder, so that things are both less code, so it's less complicated, but then also just easier to use if you're continuing to add more endpoints to your specification. Next, I do like to talk about authentication, where there's always a balance between security and simplicity. One easy solution towards this is using OAuth2 tokens, where if you can integrate with something like Google or Microsoft or Okta, to be able to let people use their existing credentials to authenticate to something that's actually working. They don't have to create new passwords. They don't have to figure out what their API keys are, and you tend to have pretty good security. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this, where you can use basic authentication, you can use bearer tokens, and you can just use plain old APIs. Though at the same time, it is very important to make sure that you do have proper key management tools. You want to make sure that your users are able to rotate keys in case they are leaked, but also encourage people to rotate their keys regularly anyway, just because that is a good practice to have. You can also separate API keys per application, so you can generate a bunch of different keys that are still associated to the same account, but be able to separate them to different projects so that if one gets leaked, the entire thing doesn't get leaked and you don't have to create a new API key the entire time. And it's also very nice to always have a validation API key endpoint, where a lot of people are going to want to make sure that their API key works and they are calling a proper kind of curl script, just being able to call your API endpoint properly. And oftentimes I see a lot of different API specifications ignore just the simple win of saying, let's validate it. Let's make sure that it works. Let's do a simple win that doesn't require a bunch of different parameters to put in. Just say, yes, this works. And you can even say how many minutes you've used, how much money has it cost. You can generate whatever is going to make sense in regards to that. I also like to make sure that we are keeping it simple, where we are making it clear how to create a call, and we're also making it clear what the response of these calls are, where you want to make sure that the expectations between different user levels is still clear. So you're going to have the people who are very experienced in APIs who are going to just kind of run through everything without making anything just kind of an issue of, oh, I'm not going to read every single part of documentation. That's not what's important to me. But then you're also going to have people who are going to not only understand how something is built. So making sure that you are properly documenting what the response body is going to look like. As I can see, this is an actual example of a response body that we're showing within our documentation over here. But also making sure that it just isn't too boggy to run down. You can direct people to other documentation if you want a full area of that. Make sure you're labeling and organizing your JSON well, where you can use tools like JQ to make sure that you are actually formatting JSON in a way that is readable to human eyes instead of just readable to computers. And once again, just kind of hammering down the idea of consistent parameters across different endpoints. Examples of quality docs. So this is kind of the area that I like talking about, taking advantage of other things that you're already using. So if you're using existing third-party APIs in your stack, or if you're taking a look at your previous employers, look at their documentation pages and look at their specification docs and take advantage of what they're doing right and see if you can apply that to your own documentation. Similarly, take a look at your competitors' docs and see if they're doing anything that you want to be doing or not doing, as well as your internal docs to make sure that you're just doing things that are going to be intuitive to your developers. I like taking a look at Slack, Stripe, GitHub, and Twitter as examples of documentation that I've had a good time with, but take advantage of what's going to be relevant towards the industry and the marketplace and the developers that are going to be using yours. What are they familiar with? What did they consider to be good documentation? And customize it towards that. There are documentation platforms that are going to be able to help you with this, where they will help validate your OpenAPI spec, but also just make the experience a lot better instead of having to build it all yourself. There are a lot of different examples, like Remy.com, who provides it as a software as a service, but there's also open source ones like Redocly, DapperDocs, Widergen, Swagger UI. They're all going to provide very easy ways for you to put in your raw API spec and give you some documentation. You're of course going to want to customize it a little bit after that, but it takes a lot of the hard work that is mostly just kind of not the difficult part, but just kind of the tedious part out of the way for you. And this is also going to help ensure that the public-facing endpoints work, where they're going to generate sample code for you automatically, so you don't have to write your own. And they're also going to allow you to make calls within the website most of the time, so that you don't have to go into your terminal or into your code editor. You can just do it immediately from there, because if you're keeping your users and your developers on your documentation website, they're going to be able to explore more. You don't want them to leave. You want them to learn more and stay there. So this is an example of our documentation website where we are showing off a couple different things, where we have this endpoint. This is our get enhanced results endpoint, where we have a couple different things. You can see all the different languages on the top right, where we also have our authentication section, where you can directly put in your API key And it's going to allow you to call this endpoint directly within the documentation and API reference website. You can put in the parameters. So here we have a job ID, we have a description for everything, and we have all the different responses that you might get. You can even click on all the different responses to see what is going to be inside of those responses if there is more complicated stuff going on within there. So then we can see all the different languages. It's going to show you what the code looks like in real time so that you can copy it directly to your own workspace. And then it's going to show you the response after you click try it, where it's actually going to make a real API call using your API key and show off everything that is happening within there. And this is all living on your documentation website. So let's talk about the elephant in the room too, technical debt, where it's really hard to change existing infrastructure. A lot of teams often like to shovel aside all the technical debt in favor of wanting to build new and fun and exciting, interesting tools. But the issue is it gets even harder to remove technical debt the longer you let it acclimate. Where if you just kind of leave it there and you keep on building more and more and more things on top of it, the more that becomes the weakest link in the entire infrastructure of your development kind of interface that you're showing off to all your different users. When you have technical debt, oftentimes this is going to turn off new users from using you as opposed to people who are building on the more robust and newer pieces of kind of software and infrastructure that are going on. And you're also going to see existing users be poached away from you, where if there is a competitor that has completely revamped things to use things in a better way, they're going to jump ship and go to somebody else. Additionally, there's also always the security vulnerability issue, where the longer you hold on to your old content and your old dependencies, the longer it's going to kind of be around for people to add vulnerabilities into it and to be able to attack it. So you do want to keep on doing the new thing so that you keep your users happy, excited, and secure. So one way that I like to kind of encourage people to get rid of technical debt is to think agile, using product management techniques to get user stories, where you can think of the as a blank, I want to blank so I can blank story, trying to really think about the customer, about the developer, about the user, so that you can actually try to get to the core, what do people want to use versus what would be fun to build. You really want to make sure that you're kind of building towards actual useful and desired opportunities. Scrum Masters can be useful for this, but I also highly recommend talking to your developer relations team. I recommend talking to your sales team. Like, what are people actually looking for? What are they interested in? And I like to create goals to chunk out the technical debt, where if you can break things out into subcategories to get a lot of small wins, that's going to make your team a lot more motivated to keep working, as opposed to having a smaller amount of larger wins where people are going to get tired because halfway through they're going to be dismotivated that they haven't finished it yet. Where if you break it up into chunks, you're going to have a lot of people feel like they're being positively reinforced. They are having victories. So you just need to keep on chunking them out. You can use tools like Notion, Jira, Asana, and other product management tools to help organize these, just to make sure that you have a proper game plan and then it's also visible to your internal teams and internal stakeholders to make sure that people know where the priorities actually are and where they should continue going. I like to make sure that we are dogfooding everything as well. And what dogfooding is making your team actually use the API internally, where you aren't just showing this off to a bunch of customers and developers, you are actually using it yourself, where you can be doing things like getting internal tools to be developing something that makes sense for your existing workspace, but then also getting feedback from other teams. You have a lot of developers in your team likely, but they've never touched your API before. So why don't you have like a little show and tell time and get feedback from the developers that you already know and already work with, so that you don't have to rely on getting customers upset and not enjoying your product. You can get direct feedback from people who want to actually see the success. Utilize your developer relations team if it's available. We have a lot of insights towards making sure that things are intuitive and easy to use, because as I've mentioned at the very beginning, we use a lot of different APIs. And gather trusted user feedback. Like, if you do have customers who are your champions and who have been with you since day one, or just have been really great people to work with, take advantage of them. Like, see if they are willing to give you some feedback and do a nice little info session with you to give some kind of ideas of what they think would work best for you. And this is all in addition to automated testing. This is not in replacement of making sure that your automated tests work. This is just all meant to work together just to build a very robust, but also very nice to use platform in the first place. So an example of us dogfooding within Dolby I/O is using Dolby I/O media with our box integration, where we are working on a lot of different things that involve audio and video files. So for example, I've actually been working a lot on making a lot of different videos. So every single project that we make, we put through our Enhance API to improve the audio quality. And this is our own tool, this is our own API, and we are using it ourselves so that if we do see something wrong, if the output that we're getting from the video or audio file doesn't sound better, that is a sign immediately to go to our engineering team and go, what's going on? Why is this not working properly? This is going to be a really nice tool to make sure that you're taking advantage of something that you're actually building so you can see what the actual use case and what the developer experience is going to look like and can continue kind of making it go through, where we are able to enhance within Box, but you can also do it in Python, JavaScript, Shell, and so on as alternatives. And we also do the same thing with things like transcoding and music mastering as well. Another example is on our communications side, we have an API for video calls, but we want to make sure that we're actually using this for video calls in the first place, where we use this to expose what the average user workflow is going to be, find common use cases, and see what nice to have features there would be. Like if you're on a video call and you see that there are certain settings that are missing that you would expect to use, you would want to relay that to your own team. You want to actually try it out and make sure that it's working the way that you would expect it to. And one of the really cool things about a live API like this is that developers get very curious when quirks happen in the real time, where if there is a glitch or something isn't happening as expected, they get very motivated and very excited to figure out what happened there. And the more you actually use these tools, the more exposure they're going to have towards seeing it actually work live and seeing what that use case is actually going to be outside of their test environments. So as I kind of close out this conversation, I just want to reiterate that everything is a work in progress. We're still in a work in progress at Dolby I/O. This is not an example of we're being perfect. This is just a lot of different tips that I've been trying to work with the entire team to improve all this together. And you should be thinking about it this way too. But remember that the best way to get this through is through constant communication. You're going to be working with teams all over the place in areas like product, engineering, marketing, sales, and even more, depending on how your company structure is built. So make sure you're not keeping to yourselves, but you're communicating with each other and trying to figure out the best ways to make this all move forward, because you're all a team at the end of the day and you all want to see it succeed. So that's all I have for right now. Thank you so much for showing, and I'd love to hear if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Griffin. One question about the culture there. Like you talked about like how to put it with the teams and working with the teams, but how was like the involvement of higher management into this? Was it really a bottom-up approach or top-down approach or both?
We've actually been very lucky in that our VP for the Dolby I/O department, who runs the entire department, actually comes from a developer relations background. So she's actually been the biggest champion of making sure that it works and that it's intuitive and that developers actually want to use it. So there definitely is a very great support from the upper management, but you can't always rely on having that. So having a bottom-up approach is also an important thing to have. The way I like kind of thinking about it is it's kind of like a binary search where you want to be approaching it from both directions instead of just one. So being a champion from the lower ground and actually talking to the individual engineers and the individual people who are actually building it is going to be just as important as having that be a priority from upper management, because you just want to make sure that every single person is on the same page and on board with these improvements, because that's what's actually going to cause change to happen.
So the next talk is about like OpenAPI version 3 compared to other versions. At some point internally, did you have any discussion on that? It was obvious to use one specification versus another on the versions.
Yeah, I think we just kind of stuck with the most modern version of OpenAPI than at the time that we were starting all of it. I wasn't part of that discussion. I actually joined after that decision was made. And that kind of goes with the area of technical debt as well, where usually there's probably going to be a reason that you're going to want to upgrade eventually. And the sooner you upgrade, the sooner it is going to kind of be easier to continue improving and modifying it. That's kind of my opinion towards it, but I'm very curious to hear what the next talk has to say about if that's worth it or not, because uh, I don't have a clear answer to that.
Yeah, let's listen to the next talk. We have a last question, like 5 seconds. How can we get a T-shirt like yours?
So this was a t-shirt that we were giving out at our time at South by Southwest. Make sure that you just keep up to date on all the different events that Dolby.io is going to. We have an events page at dolby.io/events where you can see where we're going to be in the world. And we do have a very awesome marketing team who designs some really cool swag that we love to give out. So keep an eye out on where we're going to be next, and we'll have some exclusive content for you to hopefully pick up.
Perfect, Griffin. Thank you very much, and looking forward to having you at one of our next events.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much.